So let's channel some strength from death. We'll look at some rules for some allied Drukhari space elves. Let's talk through the Ynari devoted of Ynnead Detachment and their 3 character datasheets in the new Codex Aeldari. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Aeldari, and more specifically Ynari, and taking a look at what the death-obsessed space elf cult can do in 10th edition. It's the big Aeldari release week this week, with all the new Phoenix Lords and Aspect Warriors going on sale on the 25th of January, with full releases in stores on the 8th of February, so not too long until the new models ship out and people start to get their hands on the codexes. As ever, if you're looking to pick up some of the new releases and help support the channel while doing so, there's a whole bunch of discount retailers linked down in the video description below. Different ones around the world offering somewhere between 10 and 20% off Games Workshop's normal rates on miniatures, so it can be a nice way to save money versus the Games Workshop web store and also support Auspex Tactics in the process if you're picking something up anyway. In any case though, for this video we're taking a look at the new rules for the death-obsessed space elves of Warhammer 40k. As Aeldari lore goes, they're one of the newer developments out there, worshipping Ynnead, the god of the dead, at one point just a growing myth that Aeldari hoped would deliver themselves from Slaanesh, but Eldrad Ulthuan and a bunch of Harlequins managed to sort of jumpstart the arrival of this deity. And as more of the dying Aeldari penish, they strengthen the god, and their hope is that this is the one true chance to defeat Slaanesh once and for all. Ynari have often had interesting and rather crazy mechanics back through their history in Warhammer 40k. In early 8th edition, their crazy soul burst mechanics were kind of broken. If things died nearby, then you could get additional actions, such as extra movement, shooting or damage, and getting that sort of thing out of sequence was just ridiculous. Being able to hide units after they'd killed something, or double shoot and deal twice as much damage as normal, or charge things to stop them firing midway through the shooting phase. It did get a rather brutal readjustment and a White Dwarf index though, that brought them back down to being a very niche faction once again. In 9th edition, they then basically became a sort of divergent craft world rules-wise, being able to access Harlequins and Drukhari, plus their unique units, and also swap out their psychic discipline for their Ynari one. And then once again in 10th edition, the rules heavily changed once more. Basically the core rules meaning that if Yvraine was the warlord, he can take half and half between the Craftworld style units and the Drukhari, and they were all using the powerful Battle Host detachment, which gave them some pretty massive rerolls, and in general they were one of the strongest ways to play Aeldari, given that you could have Battle Host rerolls on things not really costed for it, and also just access a whole bunch of other good datasheets like Adigans and Mandrakes, or Bladestorming Cabalites and Venoms. With allied 40k factions though, it does seem to be the tradition that Games Workshop heavily reinterprets them just about every time they have a new codex or new edition, and in Codex Aeldari in 10th edition they've changed once again. The Ynari actually have a dedicated detachment now, with stratagems and things that reflect their flavour, but also compared with previously they seem to have lost access to a bunch of units, which I'm sure won't be great for plenty of long-term collectors out there. For army construction, the Ynari all have their own keyword rather than the regular Asiani keyword, but then they have this disparate paths rule, which means that the overall faction can still be selected as Asiani, though it seems that the Ynari unique units, so their unique characters and Drukhari datasheets that are within the codex, they can only be taken in the devoted of Ynnead. The actual detachment that's relevant for the Ynari are different to the Harlequins, who can be mixed in with all the other detachments if you want to. In their detachment, the devoted of Ynnead has some army construction rules, named the Servants of the Whispering God, and this spells out how their Ynari units can be included, so you do need to take this detachment to be able to field any of them at all. And if you field this detachment, you can use the other Asiani units besides epic heroes. It seems that the Asiani units gain the Ynari keyword, though that wouldn't include the Harlequins, as they have Harlequins as their faction keyword. So it seems that while you can still field Harlequin units here, they're not really going to synergize with this detachment. You can't take any Asiani epic heroes in the detachment. The only ones that you can take are the Ynari named characters, so the Yncarne, Yvraine and the Visarch. And for this army you have to either have Yvraine or the Yncarne in your army, one of which must be the warlord, so I guess that's a little bit more freeing before. Previously you had to have Yvraine to unlock the army, now the Yncarne can do it too if that one makes more sense to you. The Drukhari units are now included within Codex Aeldari, often with slightly rewritten datasheets, as they won't be able to use their power from pain here. The datasheet names are all Ynari things, so say Ynari Archon or Ynari Reavers, and for the full unit list we've got the Archon and Succubus for the HQs, Cabalite Warriors, which is an Incubi for the infantry, Reaver jet bikes, and then the Raider and Venom to transport things around. For a lot of Ynari players out there, this is going to represent a painful restriction on the units that you can field. It doesn't appear that there's any way to take Scourges, Helions, Ravagers, Lilith Hesperax, the Drukhari Flyers, the Beastmaster, or the Mandrakes, many of which were really popular choices for Ynari units before, particularly things like Scourges with Battle Host rerolls, or Mandrakes to do some infiltrating. and it seems odd that Lilith Hesperax isn't able to be fielded, given that she's been working for the Ynari in the lore in the past. Definitely pretty bad feelings for people who've got those units in their armies and don't have entire Drukhari armies to support them. It is pretty painful when Games Workshop seems to rewrite this sort of allied rules for each army once per edition. In any case, with those restrictions and unit access in mind, here's the core rule for the Devoted of Ynnead detachment, and as you might expect, this one's called Strength from Death. You'll still get the faction special rule and battle focus, and all the Ynari units still have that, but on top of that you also have 3 other once per turn abilities, and they'll each target a single unit, so basically 3 of your units get helped out by this detachment rule at maximum. First up, there's Lethal Intent, which means that if at the end of the opponent's shooting phase they've destroyed one of your Ynari units, then at the end of the phase a different Ynari unit can then make a normal move, I guess strengthened by the death of their fellows. This one's actually really quite a powerful one. It means that if you lose a unit shooting, then you could backpedal from the charge for another one somewhere else, and potentially make the charge something like 6 inches or longer. A normal move can be a massive long way for a whole bunch of units out there, like the Grav tanks for example. As well as that, after the shooting's done, it means that you could move up onto an objective, which means that the enemy wouldn't be able to shoot them down after that, so you could have a unit hiding out of line of sight and then move up to take a point. Or even if you had some fragile damage dealers, like say some Incubi or Howling Banshees, they could be hiding out of line of sight in the shooting phase, your opponent guns down something else, and then they move up the board say an extra 7 or 8 inches, so they're going to be so much closer to the enemy army when it comes to their turn, and they go moving up to make charges. Lots of potential for this one, and I feel like it's a deceptively powerful rule when you use it right. Otherwise, next up we have Lethal Surge. This one is basically a boost to the Fade Back Agile Maneuver, the one that basically when a unit gets shot, you can move d6 plus 1 inches, often a good idea to hide from line of sight. Instead of just doing a normal move like that one, like you would normally be able to do, this one allows you to also move into engagement range of the unit that just shot you, so potentially if you're being attacked by something that's shooting you right up close, you could just walk straight into melee with them. I feel like this one's situational, but could be absolutely massive if the opponent falls foul of it. A lot of the time the unit shooting you isn't going to be right next to you, and in that case it doesn't really make any difference, and you still need to actually do the Fade Back Agile Maneuver. But I guess if an opponent moves up to the objective, shoots your Ynari unit, and you've actually got something pretty combat capable right next to the enemy, it could mean that you can just walk straight into melee with them, even if they prefer that wouldn't happen. And that could also safeguard your unit from any other enemy shooting as well, presuming you roll high enough on that d6 plus 1 of course. Feels like the sort of rule that often won't matter too much, but for the odd time when it does trigger on a particularly painful combination of units, it could be absolutely game changing. Finally, we've got Lethal Reprisal, which is for a non-Titanic Ynari unit below starting strength getting fights first at the start of the fight phase. Again, you select one unit on the board for this, so it can't be done multiple ways. And again, this one is potentially pretty massive. It means certain units will be really hard to engage, and discourages the enemy from chipping a few wounds off with, say, a few bolt pistols before they charge into close combat, something easily done against certain scary Aeldari troops. Again, in the right circumstances, this one could be absolutely massive. But again, the need for your unit to be damaged does make it kind of situational. You're not always going to have it as an option, and for lots of fragile Aeldari units, they might just be either alive or dead and not much in between. Definitely feels like it's something that will come up though from time to time if you've got lots of infantry about, and could be interesting for things like Wraithblades as well, which look like they can still use this, as they're the sort of unit that's quite likely to survive while being damaged, and the enemy might want to charge in to finish them off. Overall, I feel like for the potential for game-changing swings here, the detachment rule is solid enough. Interesting to have a detachment rule that basically won't really do too much for the rank and file and their engagements with the enemy, but just every so often is going to save units, or potentially absolutely ruin an enemy unit with some surprise close combat. Otherwise, getting into stratagems, and first up we have the Pall of Dread. This one's a sticky objectives one that triggers when your unit gets slain, and lasts until the opponent controls the objective at the end of any phase. Until that point, it'll be yours, even if you move off it. This one's generally a nice one to have, and particularly so for armies with fragile units that might want to move forward like Eldar. It means that you could have a cheapish unit exposed on an objective and shot down, and the objective would still be yours, presuming the opponent has to shoot it and can't get units up to fight or actually take the point. A very nice one to have in the bank. For 1 command point, there's Macabre Resilience. This one's for infantry or mounted units, but not wraith units. When the enemy shoots them or attacks them in melee, they get -1 to wounds. Generally, having reactive defensive stats on hand is almost always going to be helpful. At toughness 3, Aeldari are usually going to be super easy to wound anyway for the vast majority of enemy units, so a -1 maybe isn't quite as powerful here as it could be elsewhere, but still for individual confrontations it could make the difference between, say, a unit just getting wiped or a good chunk of it surviving, or a few more models surviving after melee attacks to hit back hard, which could be a big swing. Definitely handy to have. Next up, we've got Emissaries of Ynnead. Ynari infantry can reroll 1s to hit in melee, or all hits if the unit's below starting strength. Again, very nice for this one, but also situational. It's merely okay with the reroll ones if every single casualty is going to matter big, but goes up to being a really quite punchy damage increase if you get to reroll all hits, and it could be pretty scary with Yvraine as well. You could say have a unit of Drukhari Incubi rerolling all hit rolls and or wound rolls in melee provided they've taken one casualty, which does seem very intimidating on the damage front. For one command point, we've got Death Answers Death, and this one's sort of a return fire type one, but done in a bit of a different way to several other armies out there. This one triggers at the end of the enemy shooting phase, so the opponents had a chance to fire all their units, and one of your units that lost a model is then able to shoot as if it were the shooting phase, completely unrestricted at any targets that they want to. Again, this one's for non-Wraith units, so no using it to light up the enemy with a massive squad of Wraith Guard or something. Again, this one feels like one of the ones that's just going to be massively powerful when it does trigger maximally, but maybe not really in your control as to when it does. Given that the opponent gets to shoot all of their units, you might be able to just repeatedly focus fire, say a squad of fire dragons or warp spiders or something until they're gone. Or at least that's definitely what they should be doing if this one's alive, and certainly not just chipping off one or two casualties off a scary shooting unit. But sometimes opponents' dice will go cold, and sometimes you might get a bit lucky on your saving throws, and when that happens this could be really big. It could also be interesting enough with things like the fade away one from the battle focus things. It could even be interesting enough to actually position your unit so they could shoot further things after they've been shot. Potentially one enemy unit shoots a unit, then it moves up to have a scary line of sight on something different that's already shot, and then use this to just promptly delete that unit. In general though, it looks like this one will be best if you can shoot something that's about to charge, as that'll get you the double swing of both destroying enemy models and also saving some of yours. Next up for one command point we've got Soul Sight. This one's lethal hits and ignore cover for any Ynari unit shooting. Again, a really strong damage buff this one, and particularly good for things like smaller shuriken weapons. A unit of Guardians firing maximally with this would really enjoy it. AP-1 is just so much scarier when you've got ignore cover on the go, and lethal hits is going to make low strength volume fire really nasty against anything that's got high toughness values. Depending on the exact buffs that the Auspex can access, this one also looks really interesting for them. It does seem pretty intimidating that this can go on anything though, including big stuff like vehicles or Wraith units. If you've got enough firepower and the opponent say a Land Raider in cover or something like that, then even just the ignores cover could be big. Finally for 2 CP we've got Part in the Veil. This one's fights on death if you haven't already fought for Ynari units. Again, feels all very appropriate for them. Very nice for fragile Aeldari, who when their melee specialists get charged they're probably going to die, and this means that they can just get a last swing into the fight phase with them. It is expensive to trigger though at 2 command points, so even if it might make a lot of sense to use this, you might not always have the command points available to do so, particularly with all these other good stratagems available to deplete things. Overall, lots of good options here. Some are maybe a bit more situational than others. If you're just adding more damage and defense, then the shooting one with the lethal hits and ignores cover and the -1 to wound one both seem very predictable and easy to use. Shooting out of sequence and fights in death are both really big ones though, just maybe a little bit more situational, depending on what the enemy arm is doing. Finally for the enhancements we've got 4 here, each of these locked to a specific HQ model. For the Farseer there's Gaze of Ynnead, which gives you devastating wounds on the Eldritch Storm, which is fun but not necessarily the biggest damage boost in the world. Maybe with average rolling you might get just 1 punching through armor saves, and there's a reasonable chance that the opponent might have failed that save anyway. Definitely doesn't hurt though as a points filler. There's Storm of Whispers, which is a Warlock one. When they use their Destructor shooting, it forces the opponent to take a Battle Shock test. Again, not the greatest there really, given that it's in your own turn, it might just prevent some enemy stratagems. Otherwise, for the Drukhari Archon, there's a +2 attacks to their melee weapons, so that means there'll be 7 attacks with damage 2 and anti-infantry 3+, so fairly punchy anti-infantry close combat there. And finally we've got Morbid Might. That one's for the Succubus, and that means that she personally can reroll wound rolls in melee, but only for her, not for her led squad. That definitely makes her attacks really quite a lot more useful, but they're still only damage 1, and it just means that she's a bit more general purpose, and she's still not, say, going to be punching up too much against, say, Terminator equivalents or monsters and vehicles. In general, I'd say it's the core faction rule and stratagems that are the biggest selling point of the detachment, plus the ability to field the certain Drukhari datasheets in it as well. And interestingly, it feels like quite a lot of the things are sort of more game-changing, big melee and out-of-sequence damage sort of shenanigans, and maybe not quite as much that reliably helps out the individual squads, though I guess things like that lethal hits and ignores cover is pretty nice in the shooting phase. Finally, for the Space Elves of Death, we've got their 3 unique datasheets, which have all had changes. Pre-Codex, Yvraine was 125 points. We'll have to wait and see for Games Workshop's digital update to see what she'll be this time around. Her stat line and weapon profiles are unchanged, though she has had a few differences on her special rules. Probably the biggest downside for her is that she can't lead Harlequin troops anymore, which usually were the one of choice. Instead, she's able to lead Ynari Incubi, which feel like they might be the go-to option, given that they can actually punch pretty hard in close combat compared with most of the rest. Otherwise, she no longer has a 5+ feel no pain for her unit. Instead of that, she's in damage mode. As mentioned, give reroll wound rolls against one targeted enemy unit selected at the start of the fight phase. That's very nasty, and particularly on volume low strength Aeldari attacks. Otherwise, the Word of the Phoenix was buffed slightly. It means that in the command phase you restore D3+1 slain bodyguard models to the unit, and you can't select support weapons for that, and they come back with 4 wounds remaining, so you could take, say, casualties on the 2 wound Incubi leader. In general, she still looks pretty interesting, in particular given that she kept the Storm of Whispers pretty much intact. That's a whole load of shots with anti-infantry 2+ and devastating wounds, so can often just belt out around about 6 or so devastating wounds against infantry that get in range, which in itself is really quite a big manoeuvre, never mind whatever she and her squad get up to in melee. Otherwise, there's the Visarch, who is pretty much a Phoenix Lord style bodyguard. He has pretty much the same stat lines as them. His big thing is granting fights first to a unit, so if he also joins a unit of Incubi alongside her, there'll be a threat that most units can't really afford to charge, and could be really big for heroic intervention things too. I feel like that could be quite a big deal with maybe trying to use, say, fade away with the battle focus things to get them in a position to heroically intervene. Aeldari definitely have the movement shenanigans to get them where they need to be now. For the most part, he's kind of similar to how he was before. He grants Yvraine a 4+ feel no pain save if he's in the same unit, so basically it's hard to precision her out if the enemy tries to. And otherwise his melee profile was shifted around a fair bit. You now have the choice of 3 different stances. The standard one is now 6 attacks, strength 5, AP 2, damage 2 with devastating wounds and precision. Previously it had more AP but no dev wounds, and it's also got 8 attacks on the sweep with sustained hits 2 and damage 1. That's only at strength 4, AP 1 though, so good for clearing out hordes. And then interestingly a big character killer one with 4 attacks at strength 3, AP 4 and damage 3 with anti-epic hero 2+ and precision. Kind of fun that he's good at actually taking big name characters down, though it does maybe seem a little bit borderline versus the duelist stance, given that that also has precision and also more attacks and devastating wounds. In any case, he was certainly interesting before. I suspect he still will be now with the fights first. It's just whether or not the overall Yvraine plus fighter unit plus Visarch combo is going to be enough utility to be worth all the points, given that they will cost a lot. Finally, for the Ynari character datasheets, we've got the Yncarne. The avatar of the god of death has a very similar stat line and damage output to how it was before. 12 wounds with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable, attacking with a pretty punchy torrent attack with a bunch of strength 7, AP 1 and damage D3 attacks at range, and then 2 profiles with the Sword of Souls in melee, either hitting at a very punchy strength 12 and damage D6+1, or a bunch of damage 1 attacks. For changes, the special rules were basically nerfed a bit, though I don't necessarily think that it's a terrible thing if it goes down in points a bit, given that it was up at a pretty crazy 350 points previously. For its teleport to death style special rule, you can now only trigger that in the opponent's turn, and it can only teleport to where a friendly unit died, so a fair bit of restriction of utility there. But still, that could basically set you up with a very nasty charge in your own turn, or maybe even put it into heroic intervention range if the opponent was planning to charge something else. Perhaps more crucially as a nerf though, it's no longer anywhere near as hard to kill. Its previous datasheet rule had half damage on it, where now it's just been swapped to heal D3 wounds if you kill a unit, which is far less good. I would hope that losing that much durability comes with a hefty points decrease, and if so, the datasheet is still looking super interesting. A bit of punchy units that can handle tough stuff, and it can be one of the units that can unlock the entire Ynari detachment in the first place now. In any case, definitely a big shake-up for the Ynari there. I feel like there's probably going to be a lot of annoyance at being locked out of a bunch of units that you might have already painted up. I'm sure that won't be going down well at all with Ynari collectors. The actual rules though seem interesting enough at first glance. Out of sequence moves are always really quite powerful, and the occasional threats to lapse into either fights first or jumping into melee with something unexpectedly are both really quite nasty, as are some of the stratagem ones like the casualty unit shooting out of sequence. Fights on death is good, and the shooting boost with lethal hits and ignore cover at range is also nasty. In any case, it will be interesting to see how they stack up on the table when we get full points costs and things revealed, and I'll certainly be looking forward to talking through the Drukhari style datasheets in my main Codex Aeldari review, when we do get a few more details of those. In any case, feel free to check out the discount links in the video description if you'd like to help support the channel when picking up any Aeldari stuff at the weekend, and a big thank you to any of those using the stores. The pre-order times for the new Aspect Warriors and Phoenix Lords are listed here, even if I guess the Phoenix Lords won't be going too near those Ynari folks. In any case, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. The channel has a Patreon page if you'd like to support a bit more directly, and that has a few things such as seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.